The president has approved a 28-point plan for peace between Russia and Ukraine.
Ukraine may now face a very difficult choice, either the loss of dignity.
Imagine a peace deal that gives Russia almost everything it wants, and yet Putin still refuses to accept it. That's exactly what's happening right now. Trump's new peace plan favors Russia in ways that shocked European leaders, from freezing Ukraine's NATO ambitions to handing Moscow major leverage in future negotiations. But here's the twist: Putin still won't take the deal. Why? Because Putin doesn't want a deal, he wants dominance. And this peace plan, despite favoring Moscow, doesn't guarantee Russia's long-term control over Ukraine or Europe's security architecture. Tonight, we unpack the geopolitics behind the rejection heard around the world. The centerpiece of this unfolding story is the 28-point peace plan proposed by the Trump administration. Designed to end the war between Ukraine and Russia, it's ambitious but also deeply controversial. The plan calls for Ukraine to surrender key territories, including the Donbas region and Crimea, drastically reduce the size of its armed forces to 600,000 troops, and declare neutrality by pledging never to join NATO. President Trump described the plan as a path to resolution, saying, "We'd like to get to peace. It should have happened a long time ago. We're trying to get it ended. One way or the other, we have to get it ended yet." He also made clear that if Ukraine doesn't accept the plan by the set deadline, Kyiv could continue to fight his little heart out. The proposal isn't just about Ukraine's military and territorial concessions. It also suggests establishing a so-called Peace Council led by President Trump himself to oversee compliance with the agreement. This move is unprecedented. It would place the U.S. president directly in a supervisory role over both sides, something that has already sparked concern in Moscow and Europe alike. At its core, the U.S. draft plan is framed as a framework, not a final agreement. Trump emphasized on November 23rd, "No, not my final offer." This signals that while Washington wants to push toward peace, it is also leaving room for negotiation and putting significant pressure on Ukraine to respond quickly. The Trump peace plan has immediately drawn fire because of its highly contentious terms. At the heart of the controversy are three major areas: territorial concessions, military limitations, and restrictions on international alliances. Under the plan, Ukraine would have to cede key territories, including parts of the Donbas region and Crimea, lands Kyiv has fought to defend since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Additionally, the plan limits the Ukrainian armed forces to just 600,000 troops. While this is a reduction from their current strength of roughly 850,000, questions remain about whether this force would be combat-ready or largely symbolic. Then there's the issue of NATO. Ukraine would be barred from joining the alliance, and NATO troops would not be allowed on Ukrainian soil, while foreign fighter jets could only be stationed in Poland. This provision has sparked criticism in Europe and among Ukrainian strategists who see it as undermining their ability to defend the country. European leaders have voiced serious concern. Sir Keir Starmer argued that the plan would force Ukraine to give up territory by force and leave it defenseless to further aggression, while Friedrich Merz and Emmanuel Macron echoed warnings that reducing Ukraine's military capacity could make the country vulnerable to winter offensives by Russian forces. These contentious terms highlight a fundamental tension. The plan seeks to bring peace, but at a cost that could leave Ukraine weakened, exposed, and forced into concessions that many consider unacceptable. The very elements meant to ensure stability may, in fact, create new risks for Kyiv and its people. Almost immediately, Europe pushed back against the Trump peace plan, warning it could leave Ukraine vulnerable to further Russian aggression. Leaders criticized both the terms and the way the plan was drafted. Sir Keir Starmer, at the G20 summit in South Africa, said he was concerned about the military cap, stressing it was fundamental that Ukraine has to be able to defend itself if there's a ceasefire. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz echoed the concerns. Macron said the plan needs to be revisited, while Merz warned that the entire European continent could be affected if Ukraine is forced into concessions that leave it defenseless. European leaders were also frustrated by the process. Many were blindsided that the US consulted Russia first, rather than coordinating with Kyiv or its allies. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said, "Russia cannot impose its conditions on Ukraine and Europe." This pushback highlights a key reality. Even if Washington frames the plan as a path to peace, Europe insists any deal must protect Ukraine's security and preserve regional balance. One of the most controversial aspects of Trump's peace plan is its impact on NATO and European security. While it offers NATO-style guarantees, treating a Russian attack on Ukraine as an attack on the transatlantic community, many analysts question whether the West would actually risk direct confrontation with Moscow. At the same time, Ukraine would be barred from joining NATO, and foreign fighter jets could only operate from Poland. This has fueled concerns that Kyiv could be left without credible defense during future offensives. NATO and US officials have stressed that any security guarantees must be carefully coordinated with European allies. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that the deal is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations, based on input from both the Russian side, but it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine. The plan highlights the delicate balance between offering Ukraine security and avoiding a direct clash with Russia, making NATO's role one of the most sensitive points of the proposal. Ukraine is walking a diplomatic tightrope. President Volodymyr Zelensky is under intense pressure from every direction: the US, European allies, and the ongoing threat of Russian advances. The stakes are massive. Accepting Trump's peace plan might protect Western support, but at the cost of territorial concessions and national dignity. As Zelensky warned, without real security guarantees, Ukraine risks a third invasion and another blow to Ukraine. At home, Kyiv faces its own vulnerabilities: corruption scandals, political friction, and military strain. The potential fall of key positions like Pokrovsk in Donbass further weakens Ukraine's leverage. This makes coordination with allies even more critical. Zelensky has been in close talks with leaders such as UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and Canada's Mark Carney to align strategy before any negotiation. Moscow, meanwhile, views Trump's plan through an entirely different lens. For Vladimir Putin, the proposal signals that Washington is ready to negotiate and perhaps ready to compromise. But the Moscow rejects several core elements outright, including using $100 billion in frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's reconstruction and creating a Trump-led peace council. As analysts note, any form of US or NATO presence in Ukraine after the war is categorically unacceptable to Russia. Putin's broader goal remains unchanged: to keep Ukraine strategically subordinate politically, militarily, and economically. He frames negotiations not as talks with Kyiv, but as a US-Russia discussion about Europe's entire security order. Ukraine, in his narrative, is secondary. For Zelensky, this moment is a high-stakes strategic contest. Concede too much, and Ukraine risks losing sovereignty and credibility. Push back too hard, and Russia may escalate its offensive. The world now watches to see whether Kyiv can secure a peace that protects both its security and its dignity. From Moscow's perspective, the Trump peace plan is both an opening and a strategic test. Vladimir Putin views the proposal as evidence of US fatigue and a willingness to negotiate. Yet he has no intention of accepting terms that weaken Russia's long-term goals. The Kremlin has already rejected any structure that gives Trump or the US a supervisory role, including the proposed Peace Council. As analysts note, putting anyone above Putin, especially someone as unpredictable as Trump, would be humiliating and a signal of weakness. Moscow's priority remains clear: keep Ukraine within Russia's strategic orbit and prevent Kyiv from gaining the military or political freedom to counter Moscow. Even provisions that seem beneficial to Ukraine, like releasing $100 billion in frozen Russian assets or granting NATO-style guarantees, are seen in Russia as tools that could strengthen Kyiv, not bring peace. Putin still seeks a broader deal with Washington, not Kyiv, one that forces the U.S. to acknowledge Russia's demands, including elements of the 2021 ultimatum on NATO's posture in Europe. In essence, while the Trump plan is presented as a route to peace, Putin treats it as a measure of Western resolve. His strategy is to stay flexible, maintain leverage, and avoid any commitment that limits Russia's ambitions. Despite the Trump plan being widely perceived as favorable to Russia, Moscow's willingness to make any meaningful concessions remains uncertain. Key provisions, such as the $100 billion in frozen Russian assets earmarked for reconstruction under U.S. supervision, are unlikely to be accepted by the Kremlin. Analysts point out that it is difficult to imagine President Vladimir Putin welcoming the idea of financing the rebuilding of a country he devastated, and doing so under American authority. Moreover, while the plan proposes security guarantees for Ukraine similar to NATO's mutual defense commitments, the Kremlin has already signaled that any U.S. or NATO presence in Ukraine is categorically unacceptable. Moscow's goal is total strategic dominance. Ukraine must remain subordinate, and Western guarantees are seen as a threat to that vision. The plan also places Ukraine in a difficult position. If Kyiv refuses the terms, Russia has threatened to continue military advances. As Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated, "We are fully open to dialogue and remain ready for peace negotiations," while adding that Russia's military advances should make it clear to Zelensky and his government that it would be better to reach an agreement now rather than later. The reality is that the Trump peace plan, in its current form, is effectively dead on arrival. Ukraine is unlikely to accept terms that compromise sovereignty and security, while Russia views the framework as insufficient for its ambitions. Analysts suggest the document will either be heavily rewritten or discarded altogether. The negotiation process is far from over, and the outcome remains unpredictable, hinging on the interplay of U.S., European, Ukrainian, and Russian strategies. As the November 27th deadline approaches, the stakes could not be higher. Ukraine faces an impossible choice: accept a peace plan that risks sovereignty and security, or resist and continue a war with no guaranteed support. Europe is pushing back, NATO's role is constrained, and Putin is calculating every move for strategic advantage. The Trump peace plan may be framed as a pathway to peace, but in reality, it is a high-stakes game of global power, alliances, and influence. One thing is certain: the next week will be decisive, not just for Ukraine, but for the future of Europe's security and the balance of power in the world. So the question remains: will diplomacy prevail, or will this plan simply redraw the lines of power while leaving Ukraine to bear the cost?